They arrived again in Jerusalem, and while Jesus was walking in the temple courts, the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders came to him. "By what authority are you doing these things?" they asked. "And who gave you authority to do this?" Jesus replied, "I will ask you one question. Answer me, and I will tell you by what authority I am doing these things. John's baptism, was it from heaven or of human origin? Tell me." They discussed it among themselves and said, "If we say, 'From heaven,'" he will ask, "then why didn't you believe him? But if we say, 'Of human origin,'" they feared the people, for everyone held that John really was a prophet. So they answered Jesus, "We don't know." Jesus said, "Neither will I tell you by what authority I am doing these things."
In the Gospel according to Mark, we see Jesus engaged in a verbal clash with the chief priests. This event occurs shortly after the Master drove out the temple merchants. The scribes and elders question Christ. "By what authority are you doing these things? And who gave you this authority?" This question probes whether God is already at work before our very eyes and in our everyday lives. In the rush of daily life, it is easy to overlook His presence, losing ourselves in our duties, problems, and worries. However, it is precisely when we are most consumed by worldly matters that God is at work most intensely. Let us consider whether we notice God's actions in our daily lives. Jesus' question draws attention to the fact that our answers often reflect the state of our hearts. The chief priests in Mark's Gospel were afraid to answer directly because they knew that any response would test them. They would either acknowledge the divine origin of John and Jesus' mission, or they would reveal their disbelief and opposition to God's will, risking their popularity and exposing themselves to the crowds. The Holy Scriptures speak of the coexistence of two parallel worlds, the material and the spiritual. In both of these worlds, we can perceive God's actions. These two realms interpenetrate each other, and their existence is sustained by God, who operates in both the visible and invisible spheres. As spiritual material beings, humans are invited to live and relate with God in both dimensions. Recognizing divine action is not always simple and obvious. It requires faith, openness of heart and mind, and readiness to accept the truth, even if it is uncomfortable or difficult to understand. Jesus invites us to ask ourselves, do I believe that God is at work in my life? Do I see His hand in my daily experiences, successes, and failures? In the context of today's times dominated by technology, science, and a fast pace of life, we often forget about the spiritual. Work, family obligations, social pressure, all these can obscure God's actions. Yet in moments of silence, in reflecting on our experiences, we can perceive His presence. As the psalmist says, "Be still before the Lord and wait patiently for Him." God often acts in subtle ways, and our task is to learn to listen and recognize His voice amidst the world's clamor. In the context of today's gospel, we can also reflect on how we respond to situations where God calls us to witness. Do we have the courage to admit our faith, even if it is inconvenient? Can we stand up for the truth, knowing it might provoke opposition or dislike? Let's try in the coming week to practice techniques for seeking God's action in small, everyday events. When we tune in to perceive God's signs, we might be surprised by their significance and the simplicity of their message. It could be the smile of a loved one, unexpected help from a stranger, or a moment of peace and quiet that allows for deeper reflection. It might also be an unforeseen detour on the road, that helps us avoid a series of unfortunate events. Some call it the magic of life or the smile of fate. We Christians call it God's action. In conclusion, I would like to share with you a passage from the 11th chapter of the letter to the Hebrews, which perfectly summarizes our reflections today. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Let faith be our strength and guide in recognizing God's actions in our lives. Let us focus on the Bible and daily prayer and open our eyes. May God bless us all.